All right, everybody. Thank you guys for coming out today. For a topic that doesn't have DevOps or IoT in it, I didn't expect to see this many people in the room. Usually when you see security, sometimes you see people just kind of bolt out of the way. I actually saw some of you guys looking at the title, trying to decide should you come in or not, and then realizing you're already here and just came in. So I appreciate you guys for doing that as well. Saw several of you guys doing that. I'm Rob Grote. I'm the EVP of Technology and Strategy for Smartonix. Today we're going to talk about a topic that we call adaptive cloud security, game-changing cloud security and compliance automation strategies. Again, not necessarily an exciting topic, but for us, we're pretty passionate about it because we see that this is really a new way to manage and monitor cloud environments. It really gives you a chance to take advantage of the cloud and the uniqueness of the cloud as a web service and a web entity. So one of the things that I wanted to just find out from the audience, how many people are directly supporting federal government or DoD right now? Assume a majority. So I'm going to offend some of you guys when I have some of the slides up about what I've seen in the past. How many are specifically working in the security industry as security professionals? I'm going to offend a lot of people in this room today, I think, with some of the things that I'm going to say. But let me go back. So we talked to you a little bit about Smartonix to give you some history and context. We were actually the first company to bring the federal government into AWS. In 2009, we built a website called recovery.gov that helped track all of the spending for the Recovery Act. We had 10 weeks to build the entire site and the entire infrastructure. And the only way that we could do this, there was a congressional mandate to have the site up by October 1st. The only way that we could do this is if on day one after contract award, we could build out the dev and test environments in AWS. That kind of propelled us into doing a lot of work for the federal government. We were the first to implement FSMA moderate, FedRAMP solutions for US Department of Treasury. I think we currently manage several web properties for the US Department of Treasury, including treasury.gov. We've been a premier partner of AWS for over 4 years, inaugural managed services partner, inaugural DevOps competency, and recently our team went through an audit, a 3PAO audit, successfully for our cloud assured managed services capability. That's providing a 24/7 security operations center, managed services capability, and a managed security services capability for well over 50 web properties for the federal government. We're an authorized government reseller, channel reseller, and we pretty much do everything on AWS. So going back to 2009, when we first started doing work with recovery.gov, this is what we were hearing. Right? Hey, what is cloud? People would come up and just ask us, what's your definition of cloud? What's your definition of cloud? And the CISOs at the time were really saying cloud's too new. Unproven technologies, not necessarily secure. And they looked at workloads like web, disaster recovery, R&D, maybe email. And the drivers for adopting cloud were cost and agility. So let's fast forward to today. And how many of you guys hear this? We're now your CIOs who are driving the decisions and driving it. The CISOs aren't necessarily blocking everything. Is that they want to move to the cloud. And they're asking, why aren't we doing more in the cloud? And today we're seeing a wider variety of workloads running in AWS. It's really used for almost all workloads that you can think of. And the drivers have changed as well. The main drivers today are security, then agility, and then cost. And the more mature organizations that we work with are really looking at security as a reason to move to the cloud and move out of their data centers. In fact, what we say is that the number one reason to move to the cloud is for security reasons. The number one reason to move to the cloud is because of security. And when you look at cloud transformation, and you look at what needs to happen for agencies and enterprises to be successful, the way to do this at scale is to do security and compliance automation at scale. Adaptive cloud security, what is it and why is it important? Adaptive cloud security is when you can programmatically react to events in your environment. And those programmatic reactions to those events can fix security issues in your environment. It can help enforce compliance and enforce automation. So why is it important? How many people said they're in the federal government? How many have seen federal government data centers? How many are proud of the federal government data centers? There should be some. I was talking with one of the DOE labs guys. I think they're an exception to the rule. I'm sure that, if you're responsible for data center infrastructure, that you're probably proud of your infrastructure, you're proud of the physical security, you're proud of the different components. But you've got to be honest with yourself and understand your network, your network has been breached. All right. Somebody really likes security and doesn't want to see what I have to say.
That happened yesterday. Somebody in the other room has control too.
Oh, interesting. So I don't have to blame the security guys for, all right. Your network has been breached. Your physical security is weak. Your environments are wildly heterogeneous. You lack organizational standards. And you really don't know what's in there and you've lost control. Your data centers were built over 20 years ago, most of the ones that we've seen in the federal government. You've allowed several hundred vendors to come into your environment. Yeah, maybe they've been cleared. Yeah, you've had some processes, but they put in vast numbers of systems. You've awarded contracts to lowest cost, technically acceptable. Where do you think security fell out in that? And those guys are in your data center and they're deploying infrastructure. And if you try to figure out how many applications you have in the data center, I went through data center application rationalization, for 5 or 6 years when we were doing VMware-based technologies to really understand how to help people move into a VMware-based organization. They had no idea what applications they had running in there, which ones were important, what servers were running. Servers that were left on for years that they weren't really sure how things were working. And I know that you've put controls in place, and it's not as wild as I'm trying to suggest, but there are places where this happens all the time. And they think having that guy with the guard out front and allowing people in and putting a rigid boundary around your network traffic is enough, and we're saying it isn't. In fact, I think your application security is even worse. And I tell you why. 20 years ago, I built applications, and I shouldn't have been building applications, and I shouldn't have been deploying these applications. And some of those applications are still running. I built 15 to 20 years ago. And they're exposing the same weaknesses. Your supply chain of application partners is ever changing. Your security standardization is really hard to do, and it's virtually non-existent. And your security tools aren't covering all the security aspects and threats that they need to be covering. In fact, like I said, you don't know what applications and process you're running in that environment, and the environment is in constant flux. So here's the hard truth. One bad firewall rule from a junior administrator can enable a breach. You have this great concept of a DMZ. You've got the outer edge. You've got the DMZ edge. Your one bad firewall rule, in several cases, from that breach bringing you inside into the environment. You're a bad application programmer like myself, a lazy programmer to enable a breach because you didn't have all of the tools in place to prevent cross-site scripting, SQL inject, all the things that you guys are aware of and try to protect. You're also one smart, well-positioned, overly credentialed admin away from leaving your data center with a lot of information. So this is what you're thinking. How does the cloud really fix this? What do you think is easier to protect? A physical infrastructure that has evolved out of control, that's extremely heterogeneous for 20 years and you don't know what's in it? Or a modern architecture where everything is accessed via software API endpoints? And let's look at what we put in place over the last 5 years. When we try to protect these environments because we don't have control over what's inside, we create this false sense of security that we can protect the outer boundary, that we can limit traffic coming in, we can limit data loss, data leak, and that's okay. But we know now almost all of the breaches are from inside that perimeter, not from outside. I don't even know if this is really possible, so I was kind of tinkering with what to actually title this, because I don't know if I've seen a CISO that's happy. However, I know how to make one less angry or less likely to say no. And these are the, you guys work with CISOs, really? Okay, no. I didn't ask how many CISOs were here because I knew I was going to offend them. Know everything that's running at all times. That's really what you want to do. You want to understand what is actually happening in your environment at an application, at a server, at a process, at a device level. You want to be alerted when any configuration change happens at all. They want to know, is there any kind of drift in the environment and why is that drift there? You want environments that are immutable. You don't want to see changing environments. You want to have environments that are fixed and predictable, and you know exactly how the traffic is going to be across all of those elements, and you know exactly what the services running are going to be available. Privileged user access management and control is critical. You guys are very aware of this being in the security realm. And you want to be able to use policies and rules to be able to define access to that. You want to log everything. In a physical data center, that can be challenging because a lot of times you're limited by storage capacity. You need a very elastic environment when you're talking about doing bottomless logging. You want to be able to enforce compliance, you want to be able to enforce backups, and you want to ensure everything is encrypted. So, Amazon, over the last 4 years, and especially over the last 18 months, has introduced some really interesting, what I call security primitives, that are tools that can help you make your CISOs happy. And I'm going to talk through each one of these. And then I'm going to talk about how all of this stuff can relate and how you can start to use these tools interchangeably and build environments that can give you that adaptive kind of security and protection. AWS CloudTrail is essential. You guys have probably heard what AWS CloudTrail is, but if you think of AWS, every access to everything that you do, whether it's through the console, whether it's through the command line, all of that stuff is logged as an API call. Who did it, when they did it, what the parameters were, and what the results were. And it's all logged. You have full transparency into everything happening in your AWS account. CloudTrail enables that. CloudTrail also allows you to send that information to CloudWatch, where you can monitor what's happening, and you can create events around certain things that you want to trap on. Did somebody use root account access? Did somebody come in and deploy servers in a region they're not supposed to? Did somebody come in and elevate privileged user access? All of those things you can trap on. AWS Config, I think, was maybe released 2 years ago. Probably getting the preview, beta, and full release. What that allows you to do is take a snapshot of what does my environment look like? What's the structure of my VPC, my security groups, my EC2 instances, and I want that snapshot to stay there. And when I make changes, I want to see it be updated. Now with that, you can create config rules that'll help you do adaptive cloud security. You can create a config rule that says, if somebody changes my security group, I want to be notified. So I don't know if you guys have worked with junior admins. Sometimes you'll see firewall rules. They'll have their Comcast home account listed as your ability to come in and have access to that environment. These kind of things allow you to stop that from happening. Have full transparency if it does happen, and then to automatically fix it when it happens. And we talk a little bit about that. CloudWatch logs, automated way to be able to have access to those environments. Amazon Inspector, I think that was released in the last year as well. That allows you to automate your vulnerability scanning and analysis of your environment. You can create inspector rules to make sure that you don't have any common vulnerabilities. WAF for CloudFront, so Web Application Firewall. AWS Lambda is a critical component of everything that I'm talking about from an adaptive security perspective. It's an API that you can call and have it be driven off of events. You don't have to set up the servers for that. It's a microservice capability. But the CloudWatch events, CloudWatch logs, all feed into ability to invoke a Lambda function. VPC endpoints, identity and access management. AWS Trusted Advisor is a service where AWS analyzes your infrastructure automatically via API and provides advice for best practice configuration. Key management servers, or key management solution for AWS provides that cryptographic capability to ensure your data at rest, your data in transit is encrypted. You can even have access to a hardware-based security module with Cloud HSM. Anybody who's managed a web infrastructure, you ever get burned by the fact that your certificates go out of whack or somebody forgets to? I see at least 7 or 8 heads nodding. AWS ACM Certificate Manager takes care of all of that for you. STS is a token service that can allow you to have temporary access to the services that you need. Amazon Machine Learning. I mean, how many people would like to take their security infrastructure and really have a better understanding of what's happening and be able to apply machine learning to those capabilities, or be able to query into that through an Elasticsearch interface? VPC flow logs, we've been wanting that since 2009, and that's been around for a couple years now. But now you can analyze the traffic coming into your VPC or into your security groups. And if you set up the AWS security groups right, you know what traffic should happen between, say, your application instances and your database. You know exactly what traffic. Over time, you can even learn what traffic should be. But if there's an anomaly where suddenly you're seeing that application instance making queries or doing things that it wasn't doing before, you can trap on those events and automatically fix what's going on in those environments. AWS CloudFormation. Anybody using CloudFormation? See a few people. What a great way to be able to recreate an environment and make a recipe to define your environments. And then AWS reference architectures. I think they just released the NIST 853 reference architecture. What a great way to start. Have your environment from the very beginning have all the characteristics to meet the NIST 853 Rev 4 framework and capabilities. So what are some of the things that we want to do from a foundational perspective to get security and compliance automation? What are some very tangible things that you can build in the beginning when you're starting your AWS transformation journey? And one of the things is you want to be able to restrict what servers and what server instances people can launch and what services that they can use. You're in the federal environment, you might have a FedRAMP mandate. Not all of the AWS services are necessarily FedRAMP capable. You need an ability to be able to select what can be launched in your environment and lock that down by policy. Or even, if you don't want to allow your administrators to create environments, the security teams can create a service catalog and give them access to the service catalog, and they don't actually need privileges to be able to launch a server, but they could have privileges to launch a stack, and that stack can be pre-approved. And its infrastructure as code, so you can version control this. You can have your security teams inspect the software that creates the infrastructure. You have a CloudFormation template that defines your VPC boundary, defines your security groups, it defines your NACLs. That's your audit list of how that environment was created, and you can use that infrastructure, you can use that data to audit an environment before it's even built. And then on top of that, all these things can be governed by config rules and CloudWatch. And if there's a drift or if there's something that your security team has created as a policy that they want to either be notified or they want it to be automatically revoked, that's where Lambda comes in. Somebody launches a machine image with privileged access that isn't one of your pre-approved, Lambda can actually shut it down and then notify your security team that this happened. Privileged user access management, the bane of security and administrative conflict. I mean, that's where it all is. I want to be able to do this. I need to be able to do this. All admins want to have all privilege, God privilege all the time. Security guys want to do restricted kind of policies around what they can have access to, least privilege model. So within Amazon, you have the ability to lock down by IAM policy, lock down by what device is accessing it, what locations are accessing it. You can govern all of this with CloudTrail, with CloudWatch events. use CloudWatch logs, you can filter all this data, you can determine what you want to do, and you can automatically be notified. You can set policies that govern your entire cloud infrastructure, and those policies can be applied across the board to whoever's using that information in that account or cross accounts. And then you have forensics. Again, this is a really key component. Every single thing that has happened in your cloud environment in AWS is logged in CloudTrail. You have complete forensics to any user who's used any key or any privileged access or called any component within CloudTrail. Do you have that in your data center? Do you know, you might have a book that showed who came into your data center, or you might have really tight controls over who's allowed to do anything on the network level, but this is everything. There's no admin that can come in and hook up a USB drive to a port in a server and you not know about any of that. Data and encryption management. What if I told your security teams that there's a way to enforce that every drive that's used in your environment is encrypted at rest? Every data in transit is going to be encrypted. And what if I told you if somebody tried to attach a drive to a server and launch it, and it wasn't encrypted at rest, that you could have a policy that shut that down and stop that from happening? That's when you get CISOs starting to embrace cloud more than data center, because you can do policies, you can create this, again, programmatic access to what's happening in your environment, and you can define the events that you want to occur after that. And what if you can tell them that we can ensure you that all of your data is going to be backed up? Boundary management. Again, drift causes security breaches. Somebody does a configuration change, maybe during a testing cycle, or maybe they forget to unrestrict a rule or something that they've created. It's human behavior. How can you create an environment that allows you to automatically react to that drift and make sure it was part of a change control? And what if you could get a list of everything that's changed in your environment week over week, so your change control meetings now include an analysis of what's happened that week and planned events moving forward? What if you could decide during that change control meeting that these 15 instances are instances that you want to do something to, and you can tag these instances and say, change controls 7545. Put that tag on those particular instances. If any configuration drift happens during that week, you could programmatically say, I will allow drift to happen on just these instances with this change control number. Think of the control that that can give you. Again, you have to rethink the way that you do security and think about how can I programmatically apply policy in these environments? And how can I make sure that every time I create a VPC, I create it exactly the same way? That if I'm creating a solution for customer A or customer B or customer C in this environment, it has a recipe that's been pre-approved by security. You know exactly how you want it all to be laid out, and it's laid out consistently in your infrastructure. You move away from the problems that you get with a heterogeneous environment, and you start to have similarities across all of your environments. So how do you enforce security best practices? You can use rules from Amazon Inspector to help do some of the automated assessments. But even on top of that, none of this precludes you from using your existing security and tools that you use in your environments that you're comfortable with. Nearly all the security tools that we work with, whether it's antivirus, host-based protection systems, intrusion protection systems, security incident and event management, most of these modern security tools work in the cloud environment the same way that they work in your on-premise environment. I'm just talking about the primitives that AWS is giving you that you can use to augment those tools. Clearly what you want to do is you want to work with your security team and says, what are the things that bother you? And the security guys are going to say, I want to make sure everything's encrypted. Create a custom trigger and CloudTrail rule to make sure that happens. I want to make sure that only pre-approved images get launched. Create a rule that makes sure that anybody with privileged user access can only use these particular AMIs. I want to know if somebody's got my root account credentials. You should never be using your root account credentials in AWS for any services. Anytime that gets flagged, I want to know that it was flagged, where it was flagged from, and I want to rotate those keys immediately. Use pre-approved CloudFormation templates. Create your solutions the same way every time. I mean, how many people have deployed SharePoint or Exchange or a LAMP stack or a web stack, and it's deployed differently every time? Make it a recipe. Make it the same. Very important. Use Lambda to programmatically react to events. I know exactly what you're going to say. My environment's FedRAMP. Lambda is not part of the FedRAMP stack. Not yet. However, be pragmatic with your security. Work with your security teams to allow them to look at what microservices are, how they work, and the security benefits of that. We've had customers tell us they didn't want to use CloudTrail because CloudTrail wasn't FedRAMP. That nonsense has to stop. You need that API data. There's a valid reason to know everything that's happening in your environment. It's absolutely insane that we've got people that'll say, FedRAMP only. My rant's over. I see some people in the choir. All right. Use the scale and power of AWS to analyze the events and logs within your environment. You're limited in physical environment by capacity. In a cloud environment, you should not think of capacity limiting anything. Log everything. Take all events from everything. Pull all that data in. Have a common centralized way to view what's really happening in your infrastructure and analyze it. Use machine learning. Use your data analytics tools. Use the rules that your security guys, your smart security guys can codify what they want to see in this environment. Don't just use it when there's a breach and you need it for audit purposes. Don't use it just for forensics purposes. Use it to actively monitor and manage your environment. Our thoughts on this is that you should build these foundational cloud things, cloud services, security services in your environment up front with the anticipation that you're going to move your most critical workloads in the cloud. Because like I said, your data center sucks. Your application security is crap. It's horrible. Build the foundational services in a new environment and move your most critical workloads into the cloud. Shameless plug number 2. Use a managed security service partner to help your transformation. This isn't easy necessarily. There's a lot of complexity sometimes moving into the cloud. Find experts that can help you in that transformation, learn from those experts, work with them, build that capability into your organization, and then move forward. And while you're doing that, embrace security and compliance automation. That's going to give you the best way to scale, the best way to really understand how to leverage the power of the cloud. All right. Anybody that I didn't piss off can ask the first questions. Yes, ma'am. Hang on, we have a mic. Well, I'll repeat the question. Go ahead.
Thank you. So you talked about a pragmatic approach to security, which I totally agree with. So you also talked about embracing encryption at rest and transit, which are usual principles. But my question is, there are a lot of AWS services, good services like SQS, that don't encrypt everything at rest, like the payloads don't encrypt at rest. Does that mean we shouldn't use them, or does that mean use a pragmatic approach and use them?
So the question was, you've got services within AWS that don't necessarily have the endpoints encrypted for data moving back and forth across. Should you use a pragmatic approach and recognize that using something like a software as a service or platform as a service capability like SQS, or should you, because you have rigid security requirements that say all data has to be encrypted at rest or encrypted in transit, what should you do? It depends on the environment. If you're managing a HIPAA-compliant environment, you don't have a choice. You have to have end-to-end encryption. PCI-compliant environments have to have end-to-end encryption.
Rob, what about encrypting the message before it's put into SQS?
And there is the option of encrypting in the clear. That's why we have CTO here to answer the good questions. Encrypt before you use it, then use that service just like you would use it across as a wire service. And you have that ability to share keys between the listener and the poster of those messages. So there are things that you can do. What do we call it? Compensating controls that we put in place to be able to utilize services like that. Yes, sir. Wait, are you a CISO? Okay.
You talked about some of the confusion between this thing. We can only use FedRAMP. FedRAMP only, no cloud trail. It's not in FedRAMP. You look at a service like config, which behind it, it's a lot of Lambda, and config is there inside of GovCloud, but Lambda's not. How do you have that conversation with your CISOs, with your stakeholders, to say, hey, this control plane, we need to use this, and the part that you're saying is okay to use is just kind of like the front end to much bigger, badder back end.
Yeah, so we've had conversations. Again, you have to have pragmatic conversations. Look at the capability that's providing and look at the risk and make a risk-based decision, right? So we've talked with, if you think of Elastic Beanstalk, right? That's a service. It's pulling up servers. Those servers are running on FedRAMP compliant infrastructure. We did that. SMS, I think, was another one where we've encountered that.
There's also Lambda as an AMI. So even GovCloud, you can deploy the Lambda functionality on top of an AMI within GovCloud. So the same functionality that you're leveraging within the commercial regions can be implemented within GovCloud as well. Sorry, not as a service. You can actually implement the Lambda functionality on top of an AMI. So the same code you write in the commercial regions can be leveraged in GovCloud.
I saw hands up over here. Oh, come on. Get some good questions.
So how does a lot of this change with the cloud formation when now everybody's shifting to like Docker containers where a lot of the functionality doesn't exist if you're running on like a hybrid infrastructure of Mesos or a Docker data center where it's all virtualized?
Yeah, I'm sure Anthony can ask some questions. I see the Docker and container stuff revolutionizing a lot of things around security and deployment and application mobility and services. Anthony, you've worked with securing Docker environments, either large-scale Red Hat Docker or even using ECS. What are some of the things that you think that's going to require to be able to enhance?
There's a key security implemented around instance deployment. So as you create different containers, you can create instance stacks for Docker. So there's security created within that instance stack. So then you're deploying so many instances of that application stack within containers. So a lot of that, we've worked with multiple federal customers to create instance stack certification. So every time you deploy a stack or an instance of Docker, it doesn't matter what the infrastructure is. We have common security controls applied to the infrastructure, monitoring Docker, monitoring the processes that are happening within the Docker monitoring process, and then implementing the controls across the instance. So when you create the connectors or links between the different containers, those are all security-approved implementations.
Of course.
I gotta ask one, right?
Hello, Sean.
So actually, I have a statement and a question. One
Sure.
is regarding modules that aren't FedRAMP. I mean, my take is, as a former federal CIO, assume the risk, trust people like Smartonix to do that type of work. They do a great job at it. Meaning, if it's going to help you be successful in delivering your services and meeting the mission, it makes sense to you assume the risk and make sure you have the right team with you to back up and reinforce why you need to do that, because you have to justify that in your POAMs, right? And so that's important. But I have another question, because there's several capabilities that are there that I see now that weren't available when we did the initial migration. So how does, when you start to look at CloudTrail and a lot of these other capabilities, how does this now connect into hybrid cloud environments where you have to get to the as a service and you have several workloads on-prem and as a service, and now you want to do aggregation of a lot of these security events so you can holistically see the whole space? So
a real interesting thing, we Cloud Assured Management Stack, Sean, and by the way, Sean was the CIO at the Recovery Board, the very first federal property moving into AWS way back in 2009. So I mean, very, very interesting to have him here, and thanks for asking the question. Exactly. It took a lot of effort to really move the government into this space, and definitely the Recovery Board was a pioneer in that. We built our cloud assured managed services knowing that that stack is going to have to monitor AWS infrastructure, multi-cloud infrastructure, and hybrid infrastructure. When you're dealing with the federal government, you're not dealing with an enterprise that can say, I'm going all in on the cloud. I mean, you've got 20 plus years of legacy infrastructure. But you want to be able to provide an environment that can allow them to extend into the cloud and to utilize some of those services. So your environment running in on-premise can actually send CloudWatch events into AWS that can be aggregated. Those events can trigger Lambda functions that can then call something into your on-premise infrastructure to manage it. So you're not necessarily limited to what's available to you in the particular cloud that you're working in. You can start to utilize some of those core services outside of the AWS boundary. And you can connect to them over a private network, which you're aware of with Direct Connect. And you can make low latency security observations. You can push all of your logs up to AWS to be able to use an AWS environment for big data analytics and machine learning on that environment. So you have to start rethinking the way that your existing infrastructure is going to extend into AWS. And you don't necessarily have to say, I want to have a single pane of glass for all of that. I mean, honestly, I hear that all the time, and it kind of makes me shiver because of the complexities and how hard that really is to do. But you can logically think of how can you extend my hybrid infrastructure into the cloud and start to make use of some of those, the elasticity of the cloud and the advantages that the cloud has.
Some of our environments are limited by whether services or cloud services are FedRAMP. Do you have any schedules in place for some of the services moving towards FedRAMP?
So I work for one of the AWS Premier Partners. AWS is great at listening to customers and partners, and we're a big voice to move them. So if there's particular services that you're looking for, we're probably also pushing to have that happen. AWS doesn't provide a public roadmap of when those services are going to be available, but they have a lot of input from the community and know what the priorities are and know where people are looking to do. So I wish there was a public roadmap, and I wish we could plan a little bit better for some of those capabilities. But they're introducing 2 to 3 new features every day now. I think last year they introduced 750 new features and services on top of this platform. So it's always going to be a moving target for FedRAMP. And I'd like to see FedRAMP be a little more flexible in terms of defining a boundary and allowing the services within that boundary that exist within that boundary to be approved. So there's going to be some give and take while all this is going on. Yes, ma'am.
Can you expound on your last comment about how FedRAMP could be a little bit more flexible within the boundary?
Yeah, and maybe it's just providing guidance to agencies and to partners that are implementing FedRAMP solutions. But a lot of times we feel restricted when we build something to the FedRAMP standard. And when a new service gets created, it requires us to, Anthony, you've done this several times, trying to create an environment that when you can completely define the boundary, you can implement more capabilities without having to go through that process. What are some of the other things that we've done to make that FedRAMP process a little more manageable and still be able to interject new capabilities and new technologies?
So typically when you define the VPC as your boundary endpoint for the FedRAMP package that you're putting together, we tend to link it to other VPCs, so using VPC peering to deploy those additional services that are outside the boundary. So then you have the security risk that you're managing of what you're allowing into your boundary through the peering point, and then controlling that through security group and IAM roles. So that gives you the ability to provide peripheral services or leverage cloud services outside of your defined boundary while still enforcing your common security policy.
It's kind of the jigsaw approach, right? So you take our cloud assured managed services, that's one piece of the jigsaw. That's been FedRAMP approved. You take the solution that you've deployed onto AWS, and you define a boundary where instead of just tightly coupling these two interfaces, you're just sharing data across the two, encrypted data, and then you have the interconnect. That's exactly right. So those strategies, whenever you're looking at integrating capabilities and you know you have FedRAMP in the picture, really look at isolating the two environments and figuring out the interconnect. And that's definitely one of the main strategies that we've worked successfully with that.
On that same kind of topic, one of the things that we're working on, and we were curious if you had any success, is OMB FedRAMP policy memo from December 2011, I believe, actually has guidance in there. I think it's like section D7 or 7D that says as long as you list out what these services are and give your justification, meaning I can't capture all these log files and things like that, then you're allowed to use those. I think it's D7, right?
Yeah, again,
Have you guys had
that's
success with that?
That's the education process. And the
Right.
other thing that we say all the time, NIST 800-53 is a risk management framework. It's not prescriptive, it's guidance. You make risk decisions based on that framework to determine what should be in it. And that, sometimes you'll find a CISO that understands that, and you can actually show them OMB guidance, and they'll actually, no, they won't. Sometimes they will. I can be fairly bitter about these topics. Yes, sir.
Yes, can actually comment on that because that's how we work around it for our GovOrg, Citizenship and Immigration Services. So
Okay.
it's an agency ATO,
Excellent. Excellent. Good to hear.
but it's working with Amazon, getting under the NDA, and figuring out what's really under the cover.
And you guys are probably well aware, as a government entity, you can get to the reading room, you can review the FedRAMP package, you can review the controls and the POAMs. You can request that through whoever your partner manager or your account manager is for your AWS environments. I can free you guys up. There's 3 minutes left in the presentation, or somebody can ask a question where I can make fun of CISOs again.
Just how do you see this evolving as IoT starts to come out?
That's an excellent question, and we got to talk about IoT and a security thing. The question was, how do we see this evolving as IoT comes into play? You're going to need a massive elastic infrastructure when you start to look at IoT, when you start to look at all the different devices that you're receiving telemetry information from, that you're going to want to know how they're connecting, how they're sending data, where they're sending data from. Are they allowed to provide information? What kind of controls do you have over this infrastructure? That's why cloud was made. It was made to scale to that kind of solution. And that's why we're seeing, those IoT sessions filling up all the time, where people are looking at what can I finally do at a massive scale with having all these devices and the connectivity across that. I think the programmatic access to that is going to be critical. I think you have to have adaptive security where you can react to environmental changes and you can manage this at scale. You can't have people in front of a monitor looking at events, trying to decipher what's happening without providing that programmatic level of security and access for understanding what's going on when you're talking about that big a scale.
Because this is going to be evolving, especially like with healthcare.
Absolutely.
You have a patient with a monitor that's sending in.
We were one of the earliest partners to have a BAA with AWS. We're managing a fairly large HIPAA environment where we have the exact same thing. They have all of these devices that are outside of the hospital, they're at the patients, providing telemetry data back in a secure fashion for them to be able to analyze. All kinds of interesting information that they're sending back. That's only going to expand. We're going to hang around afterwards if you guys want to come up and ask smart technical questions to Anthony or ask me questions about my favorite CISO. Thank you guys very much. Take care. Have a great day.